Ready when you are.
Right, welcome to our rather belated start, thanks to dicky internet where I'm living, up in the mountains. Today, we're going to be chatting about leadership on expeditions, because it's one of those things where I think there's several different ways of doing it. And people who aren't active in the mountain community often don't realize that there are three options, where they kind of assume that there are only two. And there's a very big difference within those options about how you lead, how your expedition functions, and thereby where risk and responsibility lies within the group and how you need to manage the group. So I think everybody's probably familiar with the traditional style, the big siege expeditions. John Hunt leads the boys up Everest. Now, Nigel, you're sort of John Hunt's generation, more or less.
Oh, thank you.
Well, you do have a taste for swanning around wearing tweeds and pretending you were born in the 1920s. You want to fill us in a bit on what that kind of leadership looks like?
Certainly. It was a very militaristic style, really, because I think of its age and the time. A lot of climbing expeditions, way up into probably at least the 60s, were run by people who were probably ex-military or had been in some kind of autocratic society or setup. And therefore, when they ran the trips, and they were mainly big siege trips, as we've said, Cathy, people with, absolute precision planning that had gone back years, like an exercise, that would go onto the mountain, and it would be led by an individual who would take the choices. No, they would have a planning team around them. They would have people with specialisms, but they would make the rules, and they would be saying, right, this is how we're going to build the camps. This is what we're going to do at what time. They draw the timetable up. And then if you were classically in the 53 Everest expedition with Hunt, they would classically be saying, right, when we've got to this point, we will be deciding who is making the summit pushes and in what order. And very famously, that's what happened. People were put into pairs to then try and push, make for the summit. If they failed, then the next two could go, learning off the experience of the two just gone. And the story, as we all know, got Hillary and Tenzing on the summit later on. But they weren't the first pair to go. But it was set down in a rule-based fashion. And in its way, it succeeded. Though Hunt said, of course, it was a huge team effort, and it was. The press and the media will always remember the two people that stand on the top.
Well, what's interesting about that style of leadership, apart from the fact that it's effectively gone out of fashion now, is even in its time, it could be very effective, but it also could run into all sorts of problems with the dynamic in the team. And on Chris Bonington's expedition to the southwest face of Everest, for example, that one was fairly notorious for A team, B team setup, and a good deal of sort of covert competition about who was going to be one of those summit pairs, and whether you were trying to do a lot of work to prove your worth or whether you were trying to save your energy so that you'd still be standing by the time the team came to go to the summit. It also doesn't really allow you for maximum flexibility, because the orders are coming from someone who's far down the mountain, having to have information relayed to him by radio. It doesn't allow your top-end climbers on the ground to look at what they see and make decisions.
I think something as well, Cathy, that changed, and I think radio changed a lot of it. Earlier expeditions than this, in the 20s and 30s, of course, people, though it might have been set up as a huge expedition, when they were high up on the mountain, you had to get a message to them by letter or note and send a Sherpa up with it, which might take a day or half a day. Once we've got radio, and you can call down to base camp or be given orders, this is what I want you to do, because I'm 2.5 miles below you. Suddenly, that sort of, it's well documented in sort of the Mallory trips that letters were left in tents with instructions or what was going on or what they were hoping to do, because it was the only way to pass the information. Times moved on with radio, and suddenly the leader didn't have to be on site all the time. They could be remote, not tremendously remote, but remote enough. But as you say, still send orders up and down the mountain quickly.
Yes, actually, that's an interesting point about the way even that model shifted over time. But I think what people now associate as being the modern model is the commercially led expedition, whereby you have a professional guide who's an expert in that particular mountain. You have a set of commercial clients who've basically bought themselves an individual place in the team. And you have some very careful structuring with some certain rules. And the famous rule that everyone always goes on about on Everest is if you haven't reached the summit by 2:00 in the afternoon, you must turn round.
Yeah.
As if this is the 11th commandment from God, as against being a way for a guide to take control over clients who may have got a serious case of summit fever mentally while not being capable physically.
Yeah.
And it's easier if you've got some kind of absolute rule that you can call on.
Yeah.
That is not, however, how most climbers operate. But commercial climbing model is interesting. I have used professional guides a few times, not for mountain climbing, but for ski touring, basically when I was learning the ropes about ski mountaineering. But I very rapidly decided that, first of all, they went too slowly. Guide pace was a bit boring. And secondly, I just didn't enjoy being completely excluded from the decision-making process. That's not why I climb, to just outsource the risk management and the decision-making to someone else. Now, I know you've also made some use of commercial guides. So what took you there?
Initially, I think it was obviously suffering my injuries. Though I'd used guides in my very early days on, I've got to learn how to climb and learn how to do it properly. It might be useful to get a guide to give me some guidance. Because you can use friends, but of course they'll always have their own little ways of doing things. But a lot of it was in my recovery when obviously I was getting back on my feet quite literally. I felt confident enough to go into the mountains with people and to do things, but I needed my edge back, and I sometimes needed a little bit of guidance on what it was going to be like to work with kit in cold temperatures with hands that I have. And I found using some guides actually very, very good and very, very useful. We got to know each other and work together on 2 or 3 little bits and bobs just to give me that bit of confidence, that little bit of edge. And occasionally I use them now, but most of the time, like yourself, I like to just get off into the hills and do what I do. But they have been, for me, a great learning experience because of my injuries.
I think the interesting thing about guide-led expeditions is it's a very safe way of doing it.
Yeah.
But the safety, I think, is about 2 things. The one is that your leader of your expedition has an incredible depth of experience. But the other is that you're not doing cutting-edge mountaineering.
No.
Because the guide has taken a group of people who are far less experienced than he is, which obviously puts a brake on how good the expedition can be.
Yeah.
And the guide himself, it's in the nature of guiding, you're legally liable for the safety of your party, that you're not going to be pushing your own personal limits. The guide should not be climbing anywhere close to his own limits. That's, not respectful to the commitment he has to the clients. But that does mean that this is not how you do cutting edge mountaineering.
Not at all. Not at all. I think it's a very good point you've made there that, you can pick up any catalogue in the world that comes out from any kind of expedition company, as they call themselves. Very, very rarely are you going to see anything that's not climbed 20 times a year or on a route that's, like you say, commercially viable with fixed ropes on or whatever else. It's just not going to happen. Quite rightly, the guide is not going to be going to that 110% with a client. They might do it with a fellow guide or with a fellow, really good climber mountaineer, but the business world just wouldn't allow it, I don't think, Cathy. The legalities of it all, should things go wrong, would scare everybody to death.
Well, I think there's another issue, because obviously guides do cutting-edge mountaineering. They are superb mountaineers. And I've been on teams where one of the members was a guide, but he wasn't being paid by the rest of us. He wasn't hired as a guide. And the dynamic is different. And I think one of the key differences is how you feel about risk. Mm-hmm. And on really hard climbs, the truth is that no one who is prepared to put their hand up for the challenge is going to give absolute authority to somebody else, because the bottom line is we're risking our lives. And if the guy who's officially called leader because Nepal or Pakistan demanded that somebody's name get put on the form as leader, which is often what being leader means in some of these expeditions. If the guy's off his rocker with ambition or altitude sickness or something else or God knows what, and is demanding that we do something that I think is unsafe, I'm not going to do it.
Absolutely.
It's my life. I don't care that there's a leader title attached to this.
Yeah, and the thing is that we all have our own capabilities, and we all have our own, as you say, perception of risk. What's to us safe or not? And as you say, if you get somebody that's going, right, let's go and lead this, and you look at this one day and think, you are absolutely crazy, off you go, leave it with you, because I am just not interested, then we will take that choice. And we're usually big enough to stand up and just say, you do what you like. That is not for me. I mean, I've turned around on peaks before because of my injuries and other things that have said to me, this is not my day. Do you know what? You go and summit. I'll see you later on, because this isn't for me. And I'm happy with that. If people want to do that, that's fine. But we've just got to, the smaller group, the people where we've got friends together. Hopefully, of course, we climb the mountain, we summit, and we all come off as friends.
Yes, I mean, I don't know. I've met climbing pairs who come off and vaguely respect each other. They wouldn't necessarily say that coming off holding hands in friendship is why they're going at all. They're going there to try and do something that's really difficult, and therefore they go with someone who they think has the right skill set.
Yes.
So
So
there's an interesting point at the beginning about what are you actually trying to achieve? With the expedition.
Yeah.
Are you after a specific objective? Are you all just out there to have a good time?
Yeah.
But then I think there's the next interesting point about leadership, is that these small teams where there's a certain equality among the team members, you may not all have the same levels, the same type of experience, but you're presumably on the team because you brought a certain array of experience that is felt to help the overall objective.
Yes.
You simply cannot lead by absolute authority in those groups. That's not why people came with you.
No.
And they're not going to do things just because you say so. They have to be led by consensus. You've actually got to take the time to talk through why people think this is unsafe, why they think this is the wrong approach, and respect the experience that they bring into the group. Yes.
And very differently, as you say, from the sort of commercial led thing where a guide will say, this is what we're doing tomorrow and this is how we're doing it. You are working as a team, and a very closely knit one at that, I hope. Because if the dynamic goes wrong, you are in real trouble. If you get people who just want to go on some great trip and they just pulled some other people along because they needed them for the permit or whatever else, that's really quite scary. But you've got to have a consensus. And as you say, you all bring a different skill. Some people are better than other things and all the rest of it. Like you would have in a business, like you would have in most parts of your life. People bring a skill to that table, that tent, wherever you are. And we're in a position where we all use those skills to our best abilities to achieve the goal, which is hopefully to achieve the route, whatever that route might be. But we've got to work together. You know, you're very small people on a very big mountain when you're going somewhere. And if there's 4 or 5 of you, you have got to work that mountain together.
Yes, I think what's important there is to be cognizant of what the different skill sets are of the people in the group, so that you can sort of move the leadership around the group depending on what particular problem you're facing.
Yeah.
And then potentially beforehand, you do need to have worked out how do we tie break, essentially, if we cannot reach an agreement. Yeah. Does somebody get the overall say? Are you going to allow your leader to be kind of the chairman of the group and he gets a casting vote? Although even that, you know, if the casting vote is for something stupid, you're going to get team members who are just like, no, I won't do it.
Yeah.
I think so. Then are you going to say, all right, we run the group according to the most conservative person in the team. But most cutting-edge mountaineering teams wouldn't be prepared to do it like that.
No.
They're more likely to say, okay, we want to split the team. So when I was on the Mazzeno Ridge, which was a fairly pushy expedition, and one where I knew that I wasn't climbing the same standard as the very best of our group, and potentially we were going to split. We agreed that we would split, but we'd split in pairs, unless obviously it's a complete emergency.
Yes.
So that at least you can say, well, we'll let the strongest guys peel off to go on. We'll allow people who've reached their risk limit to turn back. But we will try and turn back in pairs with sort of an eye to some kind of safety.
Well, I mean, this is something that needs discussing when you've got these kinds of interviews. Because if you're a group of 4 and one says, look, I'm really not able to go any further or not happy to go any further, or for whatever reason, or they get injured, let's say, or they're unwell, are they safe to go down on their own from where you are? And if they're not, then somebody either they have to stay where they are until the team come down, or somebody has to take that decision to go with them. And that can be a really interesting debate on, we all want the summit and we're not waiting for somebody else, or we don't want to leave them here, we don't think it's safe. And does somebody say, well, okay, I'll take the hit and I'll get them down because they're unable to do so? When I came off McKinley, Cathy, I was beaten up, frozen and all the rest of it. We didn't make the summit, and we took a choice not to because none of the 3 of us really were in a great position. But one of the guys took a choice on his own to try and go down and get help, and it nearly cost him his life. He nearly died doing it. Hindsight's a great thing afterwards, but at the time, somebody has to take that choice. And when there's 3 of you, you're either all together or you're not, because one of you isn't going to descend a great big piece like the West Rib on McKinley on your own. You are going down in pairs or threes purely for safety. There's no other way to do it.
Yes, I think it gives us some of the interesting problems around flat leadership of small teams, which is that there's quite a lot of scenario planning you sort of need to have done beforehand to get the group in agreement about what they think the broad lines of action are going to be. Yeah. Then you are stuck with the problem of how do you break a deadlock on the mountain? And I mean, if we're being honest about this, my experience of quite a lot of this is everyone just shrugs and says, it'll be fine. I.e., we'll work it out when it happens. And basically we're hoping it's not going to happen, which is, let's be honest, it's an approach that gets taken quite a lot.
Yes. Particularly the night before when I feel really ill and I'm not going to be able to make tomorrow. Well, just go to bed. You'll be fine. Wake up in the morning, see how you feel. Not a problem at all. And of course, 2 things happen. You either wake up full of the joys of spring, or you're half dead in your sleeping bag thinking this is crazy. And it is. I mean, you're really right. A lot of sort of, what do you think the weather's like? Well, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. We'll see in the morning. Because that's how we work. I mean, it might not be the greatest way in the world, but as you say, it's what happens in reality.
It's also realistic to reality in the sense that there simply is no way of having enough information. No. You just can't. You don't have enough information about what the weather's going to do, or about the physical or mental state of the team members, or what the snow is going to be like at 100 meters higher up the mountain. Whatever it is. So even with the best sort of structure for your leadership and your consensus in place, you're still making choices on too little information.
Yeah. I mean, and I think this is why the expeditions are cutting edge, because we're not doing a route that is climbed by 50 people a year, 100, 1,000 people a year, where everybody knows where the pitfalls are, everybody knows where the problem areas are, or you must be past these bergschrunds before the sun gets up, or over these bridges before whatever. When you are on a new route, as you say, you have no idea where your ice axe is going next, where your crampons are going to stand next, where you're going to put a camp that night. Because if nobody's been up there, you really are out on a limb. And if, at 4 o'clock in the evening, 5 o'clock, and the sun's starting to go down, and you think, we have found nothing flat enough to put a tent up, you really are pushing it. But that's why we do cutting edge mountaineering. That's the entire reason. is to push that envelope, as people call it.
Yeah, and I think that's where small teams really come into their own, because they're so flexible.
Yes.
And you can try and put together the very best available. But I think that's also potentially interesting, because people then assume, well, clearly you would do that with your number one life climbing partner. But it doesn't always work. Once you're climbing at that level, there are a few incredibly solid partnerships. Mick Fowler and his partner Paul, that's an incredibly solid long-term partnership for doing new routes. But a lot of other teams, they've had to mix and match, because it's not easy to find other people who want to do that one completely crazy thing that you want to do. And you're often having to form a pair with someone, or a small team with people who are, they have the right experience, but you don't necessarily know them terribly well, or they're not necessarily the guy you choose to, go to the pub with every Friday night. Yeah.
And the clash of characters can be quite difficult in a smaller group. I suppose with a larger commercial trip, and let's take an example, there's 15 or 20 of you, you can hide people, literally, or you can put them on the other end of a rope and keep them apart. When there's 4 of you on one line and you have a clash of characters, this is not a good place to be. And particularly when you start decision making, if characters do start to blow up in front of each other, as I've seen once in South America many, many years ago, 2 guys came into one of the huts and absolutely went at it. And I had no idea at the time they were brothers.
Right. And
these 2 guys were both guides and both brothers, and they both had a disagreement on this route, and it was tooth and nail. I mean, it was quite entertaining to watch. But the fact is that then they climb with each other, and you've got to sort of comprehend what's the dynamic on the hill. Are these 2 swearing at each other? Are they throwing each other? I mean, it was so really quite scary at the time to see it. But I also know of people who really don't get on well, but climb together like absolute titans. And I think sometimes it is the different characters that allow them to do that. And sometimes also it allows them to make decisions without always saying, well, I know my older brother's right, so I'll trust him.
Yeah, so I think you need a real awareness of your dynamic, how you like to climb.
Yeah.
Then some idea of how you're going to resolve disagreements. I mean, you may do it by having a standing up screaming fight with each other in the middle of the tent, but other people might find that incredibly distressing and a very bad way to try and approach any kind of decision. So it would help if you'd sorted that one out before you were trapped in the tent together. Then I think you've got to be looking for some way to, what are you going to do if you have an absolute disagreement? And
this is where even numbers don't work. Because if you've got even numbers, you can always have a 2 and a 2 and a 3 and a 3 and a 4 and a 4. I mean, that doesn't mean make mountain trips odd numbers by any means, but you've always got to consider what you're going to do if that happens.
Yes, that is a point. But then you've also got to consider what level of risk are we talking about? Because even, 2 to 1, the one person can still just say absolutely no. I won't take this level of risk. So you've got to have thought about beforehand, will you split this team? How will you let people go out? What level of risk is acceptable for people trying to get out?
And possibly, and if you are on a really cutting edge route, if that's a choice you want to take, or it's something the group's chosen to take, where can they get out? Are we in a position where once we're past this coombe or this shoulder, we are committed? And the only safe way down, as far as you can see at that point anyway, is to summit. Then some people, if we're going to take a choice, we need to take it now, because once you're over this coombe and you abseil off the other side, you're in, and there is no way down. And I think people really need to be good at taking decisions like that then, and perhaps saying, right, okay, 2 of us are going to go down from here. This is too much. We'll go down. We'll catch you guys at base camp. We'll give you a call on the radio or whatever when we're safe. While the other parts of the group say that's great, but also it was very, very well proved by a number of expeditions. It has been the people that go on, if they choose to do it, are they equipped and ready to go? because some of the skills going down with the other two people might be important, as might the gear. Can you split the gear and the tents and the stoves and everything else that goes with it? Because the people going up are going to need all that if they're going to survive. The people coming down, of course, it might be a couple of days down, it might be a couple of hours down, I don't know. They're not going to need the same amount of backup, but obviously the people going forward have got to carry it.
Yeah. Yes, we're busy working out that problem on my next expedition to Mount Logan, among other things, is how many pieces of communications equipment do you carry? And I think in case our answer is one, and we keep the team together.
Yeah.
But in some ways, it's a fairly relaxed expedition.
Right.
We're more interested in the experience of being on the mountain than I think any one person in a desperate, ambitious drive for the summit.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how often you don't end up having actually articulated those things. You just go through the process of packing and planning.
Yeah.
And you don't sit down as a group and try and challenge some of the unspoken assumptions.
Yeah.
Like, is it true that everybody is in this to stick together as a group? How focused are each of us on reaching the summit? How really important is that to us?
Yeah. And I think that was something that probably, in its own way, in a slightly different way, Cathy, came out of the first early expeditions that were the autocratic siege style. It's a team effort, but I will tell you which order you're going up. And people had that taken away from them. You push it as far as you like. If you summit, that's great. If you don't, come down safely. Tell us how far you got. Tell us what the conditions were like. It took it away, but the entire expedition would be planned differently because people would be building large camps with equipment and backup and gear and people, and then going out in 2s and 3s in short bursts, rather than, as an example, 2 or 4 of you, 2 tents on your back, a haul bag, and go. And you've got to summit or get into a safe position. It's having that decision making, and also who is in the group. I mean, an example, I know we've talked about this before. I had an appendicitis on the Greenland ice caps some years ago. By the way, never come on a trip with me. I am a disaster area. Clearly, but there was a doctor in the team, and the doctor felt that she had to help me, which she did, which was very kind of her. It stopped my appendix detonating in the middle of Greenland. But then, of course, they have the oaths and such about staying with their patient. And do you want that to get in the way of their summit attempt? You know, it might be just you're generally unwell. It might be something quite serious. How do they feel about what's going on? How do they feel about how they're treating? Or is it just a couple of tablets and I'll be fine by morning? It's a very, very different dynamic that's brought away from the mountain. It's something that's developed in society in their profession, but ends up coming with them onto the hill.
Yes, I think doctors are a particularly tricky problem because everyone's keen to have a doctor on an expedition.
Yeah.
Doctors don't want to be unpaid, sitting twiddling their thumbs at base camp just in case. I mean, it's thoroughly boring, and you know, it's not a good way to run your life financially either. If doctors are going to commit to going on unpaid on expeditions, they want to climb. I mean, why else would you go?
Absolutely, they want to climb. But it's the Hippocratic oath about I've now got a casualty or a patient, and my oath states I've got to treat them. You know, if you're at Camp 4, Camp 5, or wherever you are on whatever mountain in the world or wherever you are, do you want to take that? Do you want to have that decision? Because that can break your team up badly. That can break it up instantly. Because if your doctor's also a star climber and a real star climber and really committed and cutting edge, and suddenly they're going to have to say, guys, I need to stop with these people here or need to organise getting them down to wherever. That takes a real star out of your team very quickly. And it's something that, as I say, is not the mountain dynamic, but it comes with them. It's part of their dynamic that they bring to the group. Well,
the whole Hippocratic Oath thing is a bit of a, it doesn't actually say what people think it says. There's a sort of public image of it. I think most doctors don't take the Hippocratic Oath anymore, as far as I know.
No.
The other problem, of course, is particularly expeditions to North America. You don't want to be a doctor. You don't want it to be known you're a doctor because you don't want to treat North Americans under any conditions. It's too risky. The legal liability is too high. So if literally you have British doctors on teams and they go to North America undercover. It's like, yeah, all right, you're one of my team members. Yeah, I'll slip into your tent in the middle of the night and give you some advice if necessary, but I'm not a doctor. Not admitting to anything.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother issue.
That's a whole new world, that's a whole new world. But certainly getting onto the subject again, if you want to do something that really is, somebody's seen a line in a range and think that's really got to be something good to climb. The modern world really is going for small, light, fast, almost alpine style teams that are not going to be laying thousands of meters of rope, are not going to be building big camps, because I think some of the routes demand the flexibility that a small team can bring. It demands the ability to take choices quickly at the situation. I know people use the phrase at the coalface. You are not 500 meters away or 1,000 or 2,000 meters away looking through a pair of binoculars. You are at that piece of rock or ice or wherever, and you can take the decision there and then whether it's safe to continue. And some of the lines that are left to climb now, I think that is probably the only way to do them. Now that people are putting up some incredible routes in the world, and also the fact that most of the big routes that are done have been done siege style in the past. And we're now moving on to more technical, you're not going to get a camp 3 with 9 tents there because there ain't the room. There just isn't. You'll get 4 people on a ledge and you'll be cramped up all night, but you'll be fine. You can't do those kind of route siege style. It just doesn't work.
I think what's actually interesting is how many of the modern hardest climbs in the world are done in pairs.
Yeah.
And I think part of the point is that pairs get you out of the whole leadership issue altogether.
Yeah.
There are simply 2 of you. You're working as a unit. You succeed or fail as a unit. And it makes you incredibly fast and incredibly flexible. Yeah. Of course, what it does do is it doesn't give you a great deal in the way of any kind of backup. And if one of you is ill, both of you are out.
Yes.
The challenge is with the slightly bigger groups, the sort of groups of 3 through to about 6 or 8 maybe, where you're still using very, very flat leadership style. Essentially, it's a consensus, possibly with a leader who's kind of first among equals within the group.
Yeah.
And again, it can be very flexible. It can allow individual people to contribute all their abilities to the team. But it can also get paralysis by committee, effectively, where you can't reach a decision, or the only decent decisions are all unpleasant and nobody wants to make the call.
Yeah.
Or everyone just assumes that somebody else is going to deal with the difficult things. Yeah. Because nobody just stands up and says, right, I do this, you do that, because it has to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly agree with you on the pairs. There's an awful lot now, as you say. They can move quickly. They can move with, I'm not going to say minimum equipment, but light equipment. They can camp and stop in small areas, and they can work together. And if these people really are good, then there are some big routes put up that they can do with speed. It's a real alpine ascent. They can move. They're not got huge amounts of gear to get in the way. They can snip themselves on a little bit of a ridge overnight if they have to and keep it moving. They're not going to be carrying 9, 10, 12 days of food because they don't have to. They can get up there fast, do it, get some nice pictures on the top, abseil off, and thank you very much indeed, we've done it, rather than larger numbers. I'm not going to say they're more cumbersome, as you say. There is that flat structure when it comes down to decisions sometimes, but it's more getting the gear. You don't see people climbing 3,000-4,000 foot rock faces in tens. They're in pairs, and no more usually, because it just works. One of you on each end of the rope and go.
Yes, even right now, the big challenge at the minute is the first winter ascent of Nanga Parbat. So it's one of the 8,000 meter peaks. There are only 2 of them that haven't had a winter ascent, and nobody's trying K2 at the moment. So Nanga Parbat is the one. And even there, winter ascension, an 8,000 meter peak, and they're climbing in pairs.
Yeah.
Although I did notice there's one team, a slightly bigger one, and at least one of the team members isn't talking to anyone else right now.
Great.
Welcome to the modern world where this gets shared by blogs and social media feeds. So even the best climbers in the world can be having a sulk in their tent in the middle of a major project.
I'll not talk to anybody else in the tent who are 3 feet in front of me, but I'll tell the world on the blog, and then when we all get down, they can read how nasty they all are. Great, that's really going to work well. And the issue is, and you hope things like this don't happen. While you're on the mountain, hopefully concentrating on what you should be doing, which is getting up the thing, the rest of the world below you is annihilating you day by day with what's been written that you may or may not know about. And you might have a fantastic ascent, come down safely, and then hit this maelstrom of, so you were saying what about who? And all the, oh, no.
Well, yes.
What problems that with the people there now.
When your leadership decisions or your team decisions are being second guessed in real time by people several continents away from you.
Yeah, no. Something I learned very early on in mountaineering was if you're going to have an argument over, and an argument can be the simplest thing in the world. I don't want to eat this tonight. I want to eat that instead. Or I'm not doing the cooking. It's your turn. We've all been there. Get the argument done with. If you want to blow up and scream at each other, get up, scream, get all the energy out, and then get back on with the job in hand. Because if you really want to put that route up, it will not climb itself while you argue over who's having curry tonight. Get it out the way, move on, which is something we don't do enough even in our own lives. It's so easy to close down and put an argument to one side and try and ignore it rather than actually having the courage to face up to it, get it done with, and move forwards.
Good point.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. And the big advantage of these small teams is the ability to move forward quickly and flexibly and intelligently. But of course, the disadvantage is when there's this kind of disagreement, you can get very, very stuck in what feels like a deeply personal argument because you don't have a structure that allows you to resolve conflict or to have somebody just cut straight through it and say, this is what we do. And I think that's our challenge as climbers in small teams, is to have taken the time to think through how are we going to manage conflict and how are we going to manage disagreement about strategy within the project.
Yeah, it's the last thing climbers think about, as we've said, Cathy. We'll all argue over who's got the permit, who's bought this piece of gear, how much food do we need, who's done the logistics, what's the transport, where are we staying. The actual what do we do if it all goes wrong is somewhere way, way down on the scale. Because like, again, in normal life, what we want to do is look at everything that's lovely and pretty and shiny. We don't want to have a look at what actually happens if it falls to bits. Because we just don't.
Yeah, I think every team, before they leave home, should sit down in a group, eye to eye if they can, or on a Skype call and go, what happens if it falls to bits?
Yeah. How are we going to make that call? Yeah. And when we do, as I've had to do with myself, if you've had to make the call for the right reasons, how do you feel about it at the time and how are you going to feel about it later? A couple of years ago on Himlung, my right foot got really cold again. I took a decision that to go into the summit was not for me. Now, I felt pretty rotten at the time, and obviously my right foot was Baltic, and I was really scared, frankly. We got down to base camp, and as soon as I hit base camp and I got in the tent and sat in my sleeping bag, I knew I'd taken the right decision. There was no aftermath about I got told to leave the hill or I took the choice. It was the right choice to take. And though my friends summited successfully, I have never felt bad about that, and neither have they. It just wasn't my day, what we need to do. And I said earlier, come down as friends. When I said that, what I really meant was we come down the mountain in the right frame of mind. We've done the right thing that fitted us at the time or fitted the group at the time, and we all go home. We don't take decisions that wantonly put people's lives at risks. Particularly, as you say, when some people are unhappy with that and perhaps feel pressured into it or not, you've got to have the courage to stand and say, right, this is for me. this isn't for me. And yeah, we don't do it. But do we do it here? We don't. We need to get it down on the list, Cathy, at some point.
Absolutely. So I think that sounds like a good place to wrap up.
Okay. It's good for me.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with our next round of our Think Like an Explorer video blog.
Thank you, Cathy.
See you then.
Thank you, Nigel.